The year was 1889. Paris, a city of lights and shadows, welcomed Madame Garnier and her daughter Celeste. They arrived at the Hotel Beauregard as dusk painted the sky in hues of violet and grey. The hotel, a towering structure with gargoyle-adorned eaves, seemed to loom over them. Celeste, clutching her doll, felt a shiver crawl up her spine. There was a stillness to the air, an unnatural hush that settled over them as they crossed the threshold. Inside, gaslight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the worn velvet furniture. The air hung heavy with the scent of dampness and something else, something akin to forgotten memories. A man with eyes as dark as the Seine at night greeted them. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes as he handed them a heavy tarnished key. Their room was on the 5th floor, at the end of a hallway shrouded in shadows. Each step on the creaking wooden floor seemed to echo into an abyss. Celeste held her mother's hand tighter, her small hand dwarfed by her mother's gloved one. The room itself was spacious but oddly cold, the furniture draped in dust-covered sheets. Madame Garnier, ever pragmatic, dismissed Celeste's unease with a reassuring smile. "It's just an old hotel, darling," she said, her voice a calming melody in the unsettling silence. "We'll be cozy as can be." But even as she spoke, a draught snaked through the room, rustling the heavy curtains like a phantom's touch. The night held its breath. Outside, the city's murmurs were muffled by the thick hotel walls. Celeste slept soundly, her doll clutched tightly to her chest. Madame Garnier, however, found sleep elusive. The unsettling atmosphere of the hotel, the strange shadows that danced at the edge of her vision, kept her awake. Just before dawn, a cold sweat clinging to her skin, she decided to step out for some air. Perhaps a stroll through the deserted streets of Paris would ease her troubled mind. She kissed Celeste's forehead, promising to return shortly, and slipped out of the room. When morning broke, Celeste awoke to an empty room. The bed beside her was cold, the sheets undisturbed. At first it was simply the absence of her mother's presence that registered. Then a chilling realization washed over her. Madame Garnier's belongings, her hat, her gloves, her valise, they were all gone, vanished without a trace. Panic clawed at Celeste's throat. She raced downstairs, her heart pounding against her ribs like a frantic bird. The man at the desk, his face obscured by a newspaper, seemed unsurprised by her frantic inquiries. He peered at her over his spectacles, his gaze cold and unsettling. "Madame Garnier?" he echoed, his voice devoid of any inflection. He consulted a ledger, his long fingers tracing down the page. "There is no record of a Madame Garnier staying at this establishment, mademoiselle." "But we checked in last night," Celeste insisted, her voice trembling. "We were given a room on the 5th floor at the end of the hall." Her words seemed to dissolve into the oppressive silence of the lobby. The man shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement that sent a fresh wave of terror through Celeste. "I assure you, mademoiselle, you are mistaken," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "Perhaps you should try another hotel." His dismissal hung in the air, heavy and final. Celeste stood there, frozen, the weight of her mother's disappearance crushing her. Celeste refused to leave. Driven by a desperate hope and a growing sense of dread, she began her own frantic search. She scoured the hotel, her footsteps echoing in the desolate hallways. Each room she peeked into seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the weight of unseen eyes. The hotel, once grand, now felt like a labyrinth designed to trap her. Shadows seemed to twist and contort at the edges of her vision, whispering her name in hushed, chilling tones. The scent of dampness intensified, mingling with a faint metallic tang that sent shivers down her spine. She questioned the few staff she encountered, A maid with haunted eyes and a bellhop who seemed to vanish into thin air. Each encounter left her with more questions than answers, their words like smoke, elusive and impossible to grasp. Days bled into nights, and still there was no sign of Madame Garnier. Celeste, exhausted and terrified, refused to give up. Her mother was somewhere within this monstrous building. She could feel it. But the more she searched, the more she began to question her own sanity. The Hotel Beauregard seemed to shift around her, its layout changing with each passing hour. Corridors that led to dead ends one moment would reappear, leading to hidden alcoves and forgotten wings. Doors that were locked would swing open as she approached, revealing glimpses of dusty rooms frozen in time. Whispers followed her, slithering from the walls, the floorboards groaning beneath her feet like the sighs of restless spirits. She began to see things in the flickering gaslight. Fleeting shadows that resembled her mother, faces peering at her from the swirling patterns of the wallpaper. Sleep offered no escape, only a descent into a nightmare realm where the hotel's horrors became terrifyingly real. She would wake up in a cold sweat, the echo of phantom footsteps fading into the silence of her room. One evening, as she sat huddled in the hotel's deserted dining room, a voice reached her. It was a low, raspy whisper emanating from the very walls themselves. "They took her," the voice hissed. "They took her to the room beyond the mirror." Celeste's blood ran cold. The room beyond the mirror. She had seen it, a fleeting glimpse in the reflection of a tarnished silver tray, a room that didn't belong, a distorted reflection of her own terrified face staring back at her. Hope, fragile but persistent, flickered within her. Could this be the answer she'd been searching for? Was her mother trapped somewhere within the hotel's depths, held captive in a room that existed between reality and reflection? As the days turned into weeks, the mystery of Madame Garnier's disappearance deepened. Theories, each more outlandish than the last, began to circulate. Some whispered of a conspiracy within the hotel itself, a sinister plot to silence those who dared to uncover its secrets. Others spoke of government experiments, of portals and time loops, of a hidden world lurking beneath the bustling streets of Paris. There were those who dismissed Celeste's story as the ramblings of a grief-stricken child, her memories clouded by trauma. But there were others, those who had heard the whispers in the walls, who had seen the flicker of shadows in the hotel's depths, who believed. They believed that Madame Garnier had stumbled upon something dark and ancient, something that defied explanation. Celeste, clinging to the whispers in the walls, continued her search. She became a ghost herself, flitting through the hotel's corridors, her footsteps silent, her eyes wide and haunted. The hotel had become her prison, its secrets her only solace. She searched for the room beyond the mirror, her fingers trailing across cold glass, her reflection a stranger staring back at her. The line between reality and illusion blurred, the hotel's oppressive atmosphere seeping into her very being. Was it possible, she wondered, that her mother had never truly existed at all? Had the hotel, with its twisting corridors and whispering walls, created her, a figment of its own twisted imagination? The mystery of Madame Garnier's disappearance remained unsolved. The Hotel Beauregard, its secrets locked tight within its ancient walls, continued to cast its long shadow over the city. Life went on, the bustling streets of Paris oblivious to the darkness that lingered within its heart. But there were those who remembered, those who had felt the chill of the hotel's touch, who knew that some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They whispered of the vanishing on foggy nights, their voices hushed, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. And Celeste? She vanished as well, swallowed whole by the city, her story fading into legend. Some say she still roams the halls of the Hotel Beauregard, a spectral figure forever searching for her mother, a haunting reminder that some doors are best left unopened, some truths better left buried. The hotel stood silent, a monolith of secrets. Within its depths, the whispers continued, a chorus of forgotten voices echoing through the halls. A chilling reminder that some stories never truly end, they simply fade into the shadows, waiting to be rediscovered.